Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course stream for fun. Today we're doing a state of gaming, and the question is, will consoles eventually become irrelevant? And it may actually be a little sooner than you think, because we're starting to have some big changes. So let's go ahead and get started. So consoles have been around since 1972 with the Magnavox Odyssey. We had console wars for a long time. Now platforms aren't going away, but there does need to be a way to play those games still, and the best experiences are in the competitive markets for hardware and software, right? And so we had a lot of different consoles in the 70s, we had some consoles in the 80s, and then we really had kind of like a bigger push in the 90s again. But we are getting more console makers that are actually just quitting because we've had Magnavox, Atari, Sega, Google, NEC, 3DO, and SNK. They don't make consoles anymore. So we have four console makers left: Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and Valve. Valve makes the Steam Deck. And we can kind of dick around a little bit on like what exactly the definition of a console is. I'm not here to debate that. That's not what this video is for. Now, Microsoft is moving more towards software and cloud gaming, as finally we all realize at this point, and kind of moving away from their series of consoles like their Series X and S, because they've done horribly. Xbox One really didn't have a good launch, really didn't have a lot of titles too that people were looking for, and it wasn't great, and it also didn't perform that well either compared to the PlayStation 4. And PlayStation 4, I felt like, really hit a pretty good stride. A lot of people really enjoyed it, and the games were really good. And then that also affected sales for the Series X and S, which is why they've only sold like 32, 33 million units so far, which is quite a bit lower than 58 million for the Xbox One. Now, the president of Microsoft, too, they almost shut down Xbox in 2021 and 22. But a shift in strategy was presented, which I think to a degree it had already been worked on by Phil Spencer. But I think more of it was shifted right after COVID and like, hey, we are losing. We really have to do something. And so Microsoft is now using 6 different companies that are third party to basically have Xbox put in it. We're looking at LG TVs, Samsung TVs, ROG Ally and Lenovo handhelds, Meta for their VR, which we should be getting an announcement pretty soon on that, and then also Roku and Amazon. So we're getting a good chunk of these companies where like Game Pass and even Xbox app is starting to infuse into everything else on purpose, like it comes that way. And then too, with also the Xbox app and Game Pass and some others, you can also get it on your Android or Google phones. You can also, we're also getting to a point too where Apple is having to tear down their walled gardens and actually allow third-party competition. So I don't expect it too much longer before Xbox app, etc., is also on Apple devices, which would be really, really interesting. Because actually most of the mobile users in the United States are all Apple, while it's something else everywhere else in the world. So now that we have all of these, they can all do Game Pass already, but what about the Xbox app? Now, I imagine that's going to come at some point, but this doesn't mean, necessarily all, like I said, phones and tablets and other Windows devices. It's just primarily a focus with them shifting towards some of these partnerships that they've been doing. So as you can see, Xbox is a platform that's really trying to be everywhere. Now, we actually talked about this in a previous video. I'll leave it down in the link in the description if you're curious. Yeah, the video is called, I think, Xbox Going Global. That was about 8 months ago. Last we got to see with the MAUs, there's over 500 million users. Revenue growth has also spiked. We've showed that on the channel too with Tweaktown having usually some really good graphs on just what Xbox revenue is quarter by quarter, and we can see for sure that they're making a tons more money. And then 500 million users are from like people playing Xbox games on PlayStation or PC or Android to some degree, or any other handhelds or other types of devices where that stuff is accessible. So this really just leaves 2 traditional platforms left, Nintendo and Sony. Both are showing that they will continue on as a console as the focus. We have the Switch 2, which just launched, and then we also have the PlayStation 6. Sony just had an SIE meeting talking about where they were planning on going, and they're just basically planning on doing what they've already been doing. So nothing crazy, nothing amazing. Well, maybe we might see something. They do have something in the works with cloud gaming, and then we've also had rumors of this handheld. So we'll see exactly what they do with that. But they still want their primary focus to be their console. This means that we've had 11 companies actually enter the console market, and 4 are left, with Microsoft seeming to move further and further away from actual first party hardware. Not to say they won't make first party hardware. We do have a next gen, and I still think, yes, even though, quote, Keynon is canceled, quote unquote, it's just put on hold, I still think eventually we're going to get a handheld down the road, maybe when the partnership ends with ROG Ally. And because yeah, they still need to make their money, so we don't know exactly how long this is, but my guess is somewhere 3 to 5 years is kind of the general idea, and then we could actually see first party hardware from Xbox on a handheld if they think it's viable. Again, we'll have to see what happens between now and then. So in a lot of cases, Microsoft is using this third party hardware and then also focusing on first and third party software for their services. Again, it's just everything is kind of just meshing together, and Xbox is just becoming a platform to just play games. We're not focused on exclusives. We're not focused on the particular console. It's just anything, everything, everywhere. So what's ultimately happening then? Why aren't some of these consoles and other things, why are these shifts happening? Why are a lot of these console makers out of the market? I mean, gaming revenue is 455 billion last year in 2024. That should have been plenty of money to sustain and continue to grow multiple consoles and platforms and third-party publishers. I mean, good grief, we're talking almost $100 trillion or half of $1 trillion. It's an insane amount of money. So where was the biggest revenue in gaming the last 5 years? Take a little bit to think about that. Where was most of the money spent? And I bet most of us are going to get this wrong. I certainly did. Some of you are probably saying PC. And man, you're still wrong. It was mobile since 2020. So this includes phones and tablets, that kind of thing. And now handheld is now like shifting off into its own thing. Now, when that exactly transitioned over, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, they're a mobile, they're a console, they're a PC. I mean, yeah, we'll have to figure that out someday and exactly where we want to key these, but they are kind of seen as their own thing. But yeah, mobile users, they're actually double of what PC is for gaming, which is pretty insane. Gen Z and Alpha also spend more of their time and money on mobile than any other platform by 70 to 90%, which is nuts. That means the other 10 to 30% is spent on actual consoles, spent on handhelds, PC, that kind of thing, which is really crazy. And so when you hearing it that way, it's like, okay, there's really not a lot of money being generated just through the console, just through the PC. A lot of it is still there. Again, we're splitting $455 billion. That's still a good chunk of money. But when we start hearing that console is stagnating, there really isn't a lot of growth there. It's tough for the revenue to be coming in. We're not seeing console sales like we used to, even with PlayStation, for example. And I think we'll also see that with the Switch 2 as well for multiple reasons. But yeah, Gen Z and Alpha, they're spending more of their time on money on mobile. So how old are those folks? Well, millennials, 27 to 35, roughly, they're the last generation to actually be on console and have the console experience. Anyone else younger than that, well, they've experienced the mobile market. And actually, quite a few of them also bought the Switch 1. So we'll see if that actually continues to carry over. But to millennials, we're also getting more responsibilities. We're starting these careers. We're having families and kids. And so we actually spend less time and money than we used to. I know I certainly do. I used to spend quite a bit on gaming. But yeah, priorities have just shifted for me as a husband and a dad. And so let's take a look at the actual Switch 1 age demographic here. Now, I wish all other companies actually had this, but unfortunately they don't. But yeah, take a look at this. This is really fascinating. I've shown this before in a few videos. But we look at kids, and they're just not really there. It's really, really small compared to everything else, compared to 20s, 30s, and even 40s. Like that's a lot. And what I did not expect is I expected this to drop off a lot sooner as people age toward 30 and 40, but that's not actually what's happening. Now, some of them, of course, are tapping out or moving to something else or going to PC or quitting gaming entirely. We don't exactly know. There's a lot of options out there, but I am surprised at how big it is. So, of course, the biggest demographic for Switch 1, and again, I don't know exactly when this was taken, but it was supposed to be 21 or 22, I think, somewhere in there. But yeah, the biggest demographic is, 21-year-olds. That's right here. And then it continues to cater down. This is about 30. This would be 31. 31 actually has a little stick poking up out there. This would be 35. And this right here would be 40 and 42. But it is surprising how the demographic for Nintendo console on Switch is aging forward, and they're not really bringing very much behind them with Gen Alpha, because this is Gen Alpha right here, and this would be considered, kind of Gen Z right here, and then yeah, this would be Gen Alpha-ish. But yeah, Nintendo kind of has a problem, because as their current demographic ages, they're going to die off. And if the new ones don't want to come in and support it, or they want to go over to PC or PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, Nintendo starts to have just a lack of volume of purchasing power within their consumer base. And that's really not what they want to see. That is pretty freaking bad. Actually, I'll leave that up, though there's probably gameplay playing right now. So yeah, the younger generations, they don't care as much about the console. We're also seeing that in surveys. According to analytic reports like Newzoo, they care more about games and where they are and the accessibility of those games. And also even free-to-play games. And also these black hole games like Roblox, Minecraft, Call of Duty. Like, they just suck up a ton of time for folks and also a ton of money. Now, it makes sense why Nintendo, with the Wii U, why they made the gamepad. Next, they merged their console and handheld into what we know as the Switch, and then they're continuing this idea with the Switch 2. Again, they're looking at what's happening. They're looking at their markets and stuff. And while I think it's kind of a bummer we're not going to get like a 4DS or something like that for the handheld, they're just now merging everything together and trying to lump it all into one thing while making it less costly to try to support two pieces of hardware for two different purposes. They're just merging it, and that's ultimately going to save hardware cost. The Steam Deck 2 was also released as a handheld in 2022, and they've already sold over 4 million units. That's actually pretty good. Again, most people still want to play on PC, but as the younger generation is coming in, like millennials, like Gen Z, like Alpha, we're kind of, some of us are leaning toward that way. And every newer generation, where being like Beta is being born right now, every new generation is more geared toward the mobile part and the access part of gaming. So Nintendo ultimately figured out the mobile part of the market, thanks to the behavior trends of the younger gamers. And, they got to see they used phones and tablets, but they weren't dedicated necessarily to handhelds. And when we had the Steam Deck launch, many more companies hopped right in. ROG, Lenovo, MSI, Tencent even made one, which is crazy. The biggest screen ever. It's like over 10 inches. It's massive. But all of these had Steam or Xbox, and most of these actually had Steam on them. Also in 2022, Sony released God of War, a reboot on Steam. And Xbox has also had their games on PC since 2003, which was Halo CE. So Halo came out in 2001, and then a couple of years later, it was out in 2003. And again, Xbox has been shifting stuff over to PC for quite a long time. So Steam was the best for access, with the devs making for PC. And yeah, again, when you ask hundreds of devs or thousands of devs, and the responses you get back is that most of the developing studios, 65% of them are actually making games just for PC, or they are at least making a PC port of a game. So that really leaves 2 out of 3 console companies putting their games on Steam, because PlayStation is, and Xbox is, and Nintendo is still all by itself on an island. And so a handheld with Steam, it makes perfect sense. This is where all of the games are going. This is where a lot of the revenue is being produced in the gaming industry. And I think Steam roughly makes about 10 billion a year, 8 to 10 billion. Now that doesn't sound like very much, but again, they're not really selling a ton of hardware. They're just making some money off of the third-party software sales. So they're not like a first-party publisher in most cases, right? But they're just making a fee off of, hey, here's our store, sell your stuff here. Thank you for the 30%. And so even making 30% adding up to 8 to 10 billion dollars every year, that's pretty impressive. That's actually a lot of money. And there's a lot of transactions happening there. And we all know if you're on PC, Steam is the best place. That's where everything is pretty much going to be. Now, Microsoft is putting Xbox everywhere with their features and their services, and then working on providing play any game on any device. That's really their ultimate goal. This provides the best option for any generation of player. Excuse me, because now you can focus on PC, console, a handheld, a mobile, or cloud on top of that. And cloud is a new one that we're starting to have. But again, some people are really starting to enjoy this type of the service. And generally speaking, it's the younger crowd, or at least those on mobile. So it creates more versatility. It creates more access for a lot of different stuff. And yeah, this is really getting pretty fascinating. So it looks like the next gen actually will be merging Xbox and Steam together. The next gen Xbox ultimately is going to be a handheld first. This is going to be the ROG Xbox Ally X, and I just call it the XAX. That's the easiest way to put it, or the kind of weaker version, white version, that the Xbox Ally, or XA. And this is going to be Windows 11 slimmed down to a gaming version that is going to run Steam, GOG, Epic Games Store, Battle.net.com, or Battle.net, excuse me. And it's going to be all of these different types of stores, and they're going to continue to add those stores, more stores, to actual be integrated with Xbox. And then you're going to have your Xbox side too, with Play Anywhere and Game Pass, and hopefully also some emulation for backwards compatibility for the older stuff. Because I still have quite a few older games. I would love to actually have access to all of that. So we know that this is going to be for the handheld coming this holiday in 2025. And then we're also getting pretty much confirmation, and it's very hinted at, that this is also going to be the next gen console hardware for Xbox, probably coming around 2028. And so you're going to have a PC sitting in your hands, or sitting in your living room, or whatever, and you're going to be able to access pretty much everything. Now they're going to have to continue to improve stuff. This is like version 1. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be issues. And of course, not everything is going to be there at the beginning, but they're going to continue on with this business model and continue to improve it every year. There's already over 1,000 games just on Play Anywhere, where you can buy the game once, then have access and be able to play it and cross saves all over the place. Wherever you are, whatever you're playing on, it's going to be able to be there with you. So with Xbox, you're ultimately going to have 3 primary platforms on devices of your choosing. And this is what I really believe will be huge and will completely shift the gaming industry. Most generations, they'll have the choice to choose what they want. They won't have to settle for weak performance. They won't have to settle for a massive desktop that's got to be dedicated for a corner in their room, or a whole room entirely. They also won't have to settle for not being able to take stuff on the go. Again, you'll be able to literally play whatever, wherever, on whatever. That is the massive amount of accessibility that the younger generations want. And a lot of us millennials, we're excited about this too. So if you've already chosen PC to play on, you're joining about almost 1 billion other users. And this isn't just on Steam. This is just, roughly 1 billion other accounts all over the world, including China. And it's literally crazy how many console users are actually in China. But a lot of times we don't really think about them as being a massive PC market, but they are. It's pretty much what they play on. And PC too, it grows steadily every single year. Last year, they added about 34 million users just in 2024. And then consoles, again, are just stagnating. So people are already shifting over to more accessibility, more viability, more stability for their libraries and stuff, even though it's not really a physical market. It's all digital still. The storefronts and the companies, they know they have to work on preserving everything. So now we have Sony and Nintendo continuing with the old console model. Players have already built up their digital libraries and their habits, and they're likely going to stay. But the newer generations, I don't really think they're going to hop on. If they only have small libraries, or they've only been gaming for a few years, or maybe less than a decade, and with some of them going over to other platforms, like in the future, Xbox and also on PC, then, well, why do they need to stick with PlayStation? Why do they need to pay to play online at all? That's part of the argument. There's other stuff too. PlayStation also hasn't been doing great for their services while they've been raising prices. It's the same with their consoles. It's this multiple times, and especially recently, they raised the consoles some more around other parts of the world. But too, even PlayStation has said that their, quote, multi-platform focus, they know it's not just PlayStation anymore. They know that they probably can't really grow without shifting over to some other stuff. And so, yeah, I don't think newer generations are really going to see the point of buying a PlayStation. PlayStation games, too, are coming to Steam, and with so many game choices, it won't be hard to wait 12 to 16 months for the PlayStation game to come over. Like God of War, or Ghost of Yotei, or The Last of Us, or whatever. And PlayStation, from now through PlayStation 6, they have a real problem because PC and Xbox players won't have any incentive to buy a PlayStation. Because, again, if the exclusives pretty much are coming over, you can just wait, and there's plenty of other games to play. Even looking at annual revenue forecasts at Sony, they continue to stay stagnant pretty much through 2028. And isn't the PlayStation 6 supposed to release somewhere in there? Like, we're kind of expecting the PlayStation 6 maybe in 27 or maybe in 28. But again, their revenue is just kind of stagnant. Let's actually take a look here. So this is their annual reports here. So this is what they've already had, right? 2018, 19, 20, 21 wasn't a very good year for whatever reason. I mean, people had COVID money. Why weren't they spending it? And then 22, 23, and 24. 25, that's a little bit less. 26, now we're a little under what it was in 24. So yeah, we're almost equaling. Again, that almost barely moves at all. And then it finally goes up a little bit in 2028. Like, this is not great. This is not what you want to see for growth. Really, this is what you want to see for growth, right? And then again, it dips down in 2028 for Nintendo. And the reason why is because I think ultimately PlayStation and Xbox are launching their next-gen consoles here. So PlayStation has to get ahead of the curve, try to sell as much as they can. These are their projections, which again is huge. The most I think they've ever made was almost $16 billion in 2020. And then, yeah, they have 14.7, 16.7, and 18 billion. So yeah, they're making good chunks of money here. And again, that's partly because just the things cost more. The games cost more, the console, the Joy-Cons, the camera now, all that stuff. And so it's all going to kind of cost more to a degree. But again, these are really good profit numbers compared to the last year of the generation, which, yeah, was really kind of dying off, unfortunately. But yeah, Sony, they're just stagnating. Well, you think, well, Sony makes more than just PlayStation. Well, no, actually, PlayStation is like 35% of their business. So it's not TVs. It's not music. They still make money off of some of that stuff, of course. But yeah, PlayStation is the biggest part of Sony Corporation. So if Sony stagnates, so is the company. That's not great. So yeah, it does make me really curious exactly what PlayStation is going to do, because they're opting to just stay the same while gaming actually shifts. Nintendo, let's talk about them. Well, they have a good chance as long as the gamers are won over, or as long as the games win over players and the console stays affordable. But with $450, with what we're seeing with the screen, the Joy-Cons, the games, the card keys, there's a ton of stuff that people are really not that happy about. And so, yeah, if it kind of quits being affordable, which it kind of feels that way already, if it stops being user friendly, if it stops, you know, ultimately what players are expecting, then not as many people are going to buy, and not as many people too are going to invest. Now, one thing that they do certainly have is they do have true exclusives. And I think that's the only reason people are buying their console anyway. Again, they have never allowed their IPs to go anywhere else. Basically, just stay on Nintendo. And so everybody knows if they want to play Nintendo, they got to go to Nintendo. And that's what we saw with launch with 3.5 million sales in the first week for the Switch 2, which is, yeah, the best they've ever had. So a lot of people went and bought that. Though if the next-gen Xbox is Windows and a console hybrid, can't you just emulate on Xbox? You can actually already do that. You can go into dev mode. You can get some emulators on your Series X or S, and then emulate away anything. Just, you can download the ROMs, you can have the files, and then you can just play them. Some of the features are disabled on Xbox when you do that, like streaming, etc. But you can play pretty much any game that you want. Again, the Xbox operating system is built off of Windows, and now it's going to be completely Windows pretty much with the next gen. So yeah, it was interesting to see the Nintendo annual revenue kind of explode, even doubling in 2025 because of the Switch 2. And then the revenue grows through 27, and then it dips in 28. And again, that's why I think the next-gen consoles are coming in 28. And Nintendo knows that they have to get completely ahead of this because they can't compete with the other two. The GameCube. Let's talk about GameCube. It got absolutely squished when it came out roughly around the same time as the PlayStation and the Xbox. And the Xbox and PlayStation, too, they've sold tons and tons of units. And even though people really think back and love the GameCube, not a lot of people bought it. This happened again with the Wii U. Again, the Wii U had some issues. There wasn't a lot of third-party support there, which people were looking for. There were battery issues with the gamepad and some other stuff. And it just felt like an upgraded version of the Wii, and people, too, weren't really too happy about that. And all three console companies launched within 1 year. And so, yeah, the Wii U, it got stomped again. The others actually sold quite a bit better. But again, the Wii U just kind of floundered there. Now, the Wii was successful because of the audience that they targeted. They targeted kids, and they also targeted women, older women, like moms. And with how cheap it was compared to the others, yeah, it made it an easy call to actually go and just buy a Wii. It was actually the best-selling console Nintendo ever had. Now, the Switch 1, well, it's between Xbox and PlayStation generations. And again, it sold 152 million units. Also, we had COVID and the stimulus money, so people had time and cash to burn. And so, yeah, they also went out and bought one. We got to see that, too, with the revenue in 2020. And now they've done this again with the Switch 2. Is that they've launched a few years before the actual next-gen consoles come out for Xbox and PlayStation. And I personally think they have to continue to do this because when it is an equal race, I don't think they can compete. People look at it and be like, well, right now, basically, if I'm going to buy a console, it's going to be a PlayStation or an Xbox. And other people are like, well, I'm just going to buy a PC and emulate and stay over there. I can literally play everything and anything from as far back as I want to go, generally speaking. You can have virtual computers, you can install older operating systems, and you can basically, or you can also do Linux as well, which is kind of what PlayStation is based off of. OBD, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting, actually, what's going on. And so when we look at all of this, we see that things are shifting actually pretty fast in the games industry and ultimately away from consoles. They're stagnating now, but I think long term, I don't think they really go anywhere unless maybe they change some stuff and become like a hybrid console like what the Xbox is seeming to be. But yeah, they're going to change ultimately as we know them. And now the war is not going to be consoles. It's going to be platforms. So like where you can buy your games, what features you can have. And the big focus is going to be how much freedom and access and value do the platforms provide. Right now, that's Xbox as a console anyway. But yeah, the best place is still PC, hands down. So, in my opinion, Sony better figure out their stuff before we get too far into the PlayStation 6 or maybe even at the PlayStation 6 launch. Because there's already been some damage. Some people have just given up, switched over to PC. Some people, too, have also switched over to Xbox, and also vice versa. I'm going to quit Xbox because they're failing, they're not getting anywhere. And so I'm just going to go over to PlayStation. But ultimately, both as a console, they've had their problem of pulling people in, getting people to spend money, and again, maybe they're making more money as a quantity, but they're not necessarily making more margin as a company. PlayStation is still struggling to get over 10% net profit. And Xbox, it hasn't been extremely profitable either. It's also in the single digits. That's at least last what we heard from Phil Spencer, which I think a couple of years ago now. Now, I think Nintendo, I think they still have a good chance. And I believe, but even I believe at some point, I think Nintendo has to bow. And I already think to a degree they're already doing that. We've seen with the Wii, there was a massive kind of opening for the Switch 1. I mean, we had hundreds of games, 200 and whatever, or 300 for the Switch 1 for first party. And then we had like over 10,000 games for third party stuff for the Switch 1, which was pretty insane. Now with the Switch 2, their biggest launch is the lowest launch of first party titles ever with just one game, Mario Kart World, and also the biggest launch of third party for the Switch 2 that I think we've ever seen. It's like 25 titles. And there's more even coming down the pipe before the year is over. So again, we're going to see this massive deluge and push again of third party for Switch 2 players. And first party, I think will kind of show up. I think maybe we'll get it eventually in Animal Crossing. Hopefully we get a Super Smash, and we're going to get some Pokemon games. But like Star Fox and a Mario Party anytime soon, those things probably are not coming for years from now. But ultimately, I think the market is going to force Nintendo to have to shift and change too. They can't just continue to sell to a younger generation that doesn't want their console. They got to do something. They got the handheld part down. But again, even just to play current gen on Xbox and PlayStation games, they have to use an upscaler as a crutch. And while some of it does run good, and everyone is excited that a lot of original Switch 1 games run a heck of a lot better on the Switch 2, which they should, I don't think that's going to pull new people in. So as the 30 and 40-year-olds get excited and eventually die and pass away, there isn't going to be any younger generations coming in unless Nintendo actually changes something. And I don't think they know what that is yet. Hopefully they can figure that out. I do think Nintendo will be okay with an acceptable amount of profit and an acceptable amount of users, but after a while, I think they're definitely going to stagnate, and I think we're going to start seeing that with the Switch 2 this time around. The Xbox console, just as itself, it's already died, right? And now it's having to shift and mold and change and do all of this other stuff to actually stay alive and continue to grow. I think eventually next generation, PlayStation 6, I think they're going to have to shift and change stuff too, ultimately, because again, what they're already doing, what they have been doing, isn't necessarily working. And it doesn't build a lot of confidence with the SIE meeting to say, yeah, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Okay, I don't really want to invest there. And then PC, well, PC is getting everything. It's cheaper, it's more cost effective, there's a lot more versatility, there's a lot more wider range of budgets. And what I really hope is that Xbox ultimately is going to become just PC. You'll be able to choose, kind of like Build-A-Bear for your console, be able to have what you want in it, or you'll be able to upgrade stuff on the fly just like you can for a PC instead of everything being hardwired down and just being a pain to actually try to change and flop stuff, like upgrade your CPU or upgrade your RAM or your storage drive or your power supply or whatever. It'd be nice to actually be able to kind of DIY your stuff and improve it and upgrade it over time. I really don't think Windows 11 is going anywhere soon, especially if there's multi-year partnerships, etc. I don't know if we're ever going to get Windows 12. We may never at this point, because so much is already built on Windows 11. It would make sense if they just continue to improve it. Down the road, that'll eventually be a problem. But man, gaming is really changing a lot. And for consoles to stay relevant with the changes with the younger generations on what they want, consoles kind of have a problem. And I do think eventually they will become irrelevant. And either the console companies need to basically become PCs or allow more features and accessibility, or they just kind of drift off and disappear. I don't know, folks. It's going to be pretty interesting. So thanks for tuning in. You can always follow me at GamingGarbage22 at YouTube. Don't forget our playlist. We have a lot of different types of stuff there that we do on the channel. And then also you can follow me at Twitch at Don't Chat on Thee if you'd like. And if I'm playing a game, I'll certainly chat with you guys. With that, folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next one.